news. I was at the New York Times.
You helped get me in just before you bailed on me.
That was how it was working, right? I was recruiting him to the New York Times. We were looking for another NBA writer, and then I jetted, and he was upset with me for a good 2 years.
It's been a while. It's been like 13, 14 years. I forgive you.
But he doesn't hold a grudge or anything. Howard's been sitting offset for the last two segments, so he heard, I mean, unfortunately, those are the two segments where Nick got very, very fired up. So there was a little apology. He has calmed down a little bit. But let's get him riled up again. All right. The latest chapter in the Kawhi Leonard saga, called Will He or Won't He Return This Season, is playing out like he just might. Quick history. Last week, Greg Popovich said it was unlikely that Kawhi was going to be back despite being medically cleared by the Spurs training staff. So he wanted a second opinion. He came to New York to get it. He's now back in San Antonio, and reports are that he will indeed come back, and he's targeting early March as his return date. Howard, how would Kawhi's return make the Spurs a legit threat in the West?
Well, remains to be seen, and I believe there's a game separating third, which is where they currently are, from ninth in the West.
It's all bunched up in the West.
The slightest little slip-up, and you're done. So Kawhi could not be coming back soon enough.
Yeah.
But listen, we know how it is in the West. It's very not only tightly packed, but this is a superstar conference with super teams. And if the Spurs don't have their best player, their MVP candidate from a season ago, they're not going to make it very far. And, you know, Nick and I were at the Sloan Conference over the weekend in Boston. This is all the analytics guys, all the folks who do the deep dives. There's a lot of skepticism about the Spurs as they have been to date. Great regular season team. Pop, as we know, rings the most out of every last role player. That only gets you so far. In the regular season, fine. Playoffs, you need Kawhi Leonard.
And in the playoffs, assuming Kawhi's coming back, I think the Spurs can have a huge impact on who wins the title, even if they don't make it past the second round. I think the example I always want to remind the audience of, I do not think the Cavs would have won the title they won if the Thunder hadn't taken that Warriors team 7 games. I think if the Warriors beat that Thunder team in 5, then they had more left in the tank in games 5, 6, and 7 of the NBA Finals. Assuming the Spurs get to the playoffs and assuming they make it through the first round, they will either be facing Houston or Golden State in round 2. That is a brutal matchup, even if you win that series when you then have to play Houston or Golden State in round 3, whomever. So that's where I think this news could have a big impact on the championship picture, even if the Spurs aren't a part of that picture.
See, I think with Kawhi, I think the Spurs can beat anybody in the league except Golden State. I don't think they have the athleticism to stay with them on the perimeter. I think they would go big and slow it down and give them some problems in the course of a game, but I don't think they could beat them. I don't think Gasol and LaMarcus Aldridge could punish them enough inside to make up for the three-point shooting. Now, I do think San Antonio, I'm not saying I'd favor them. I do think they could beat Houston in 7. If they meet in the second round, because Popovich, Chris Paul is there where he was last year. But Popovich, how many times has he beaten Mike D'Antoni in the playoffs? And Mike D'Antoni, and I have a lot of respect for him, a great coach, but a lack of attention to detail is one of his weaknesses. And you know you may have covered some of those Phoenix, San Antonio series. Whenever it always came down to a lack of attention to detail for why they lost. A blown coverage, a bad turnover, a forgotten assignment, guys getting off the bench during a scrum, whereas in San Antonio, they don't make those mistakes. So with Kawhi, they would be trouble for anybody except the Warriors, in my opinion.
Chris, I would just say different era, different teams. And we love to make this thing about the coaches. It's usually about the players and your best players. And obviously some circumstances, too. Those suspensions to Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw for walking over the line. You know, you can't.
Joe Johnson breaking his face.
Joe Johnson breaking his face. So I look at those old Suns teams, and we know, look, we now know with advanced stats, they were middle of the pack defensively. Not terrible defensively, middle of the pack defensively, elite offensively. This Rockets team, elite offensively and very, very sound defensively. And they have guys like Chris Paul and P.J. Tucker and Luka Mbah-a-Moute. They have a defensive core there and an attention to defensive detail that is, I think, dramatically different than what we were talking about 10, 12 years ago with those Suns teams.
You don't think the Spurs could beat them?
I do not. I also think that, look, we all assume that, all right, so Kawhi comes back early March, which that's actually a few days away.
Right.
So like he may be playing later this week for all we know. We'll see. What does Kawhi look like after all this time out? And after, listen, this has been a very strange, like, how much of this is physical? How much of this has been mental about the injury? So let's see what he looks like.
And he played well when those 9 games. I mean, 16 points,
in
5 or 6 rebounds in limited minutes. He was playing well.
Rarely has there been more emphasis on the relationship between the coach and the star player in how it relates to the success of the team. It's been broken a little bit, that relationship between Pop and with Kawhi Leonard. Just because he's coming back doesn't necessarily mean all is forgiven. How much does their relationship and whether they're getting along now equal success for this Spurs team?
No, Jenna, I think it's actually a phenomenal point because I'm thinking initially physically, right? How does Kawhi look? But you're absolutely right. If there's any trust broken between coach and superstar, if there's any kind of just weird tension, yeah, that can infiltrate the entire lineup. And, you know, even a few days ago when Pop is saying, look, we just have to assume he's not back. And Tony Parker was saying, hey, listen, we would love to have him back. But you have to, as a player, you do move on. Like, that's the way this league goes. Guy goes down, you don't have any time to mourn the loss, to think about how you're adjusting. You just have to move on. So they've reformed their identity without him.
Real quick, do you think he would have, this announcement that he's coming back would have happened if Pop hadn't made those comments last week?
That's a fun one to ponder, right?
Because it felt to me like what Pop was trying to say to the world and to Kawhi is, if your plan is to come back with 2 games left in the regular season, you can't.
It certainly sounded like now or never Kawhi, right?
Yes.
And, you know, if that, put a little, burr in his saddle or whatever the expression is.
Yeah. And make him wonder about that 5-year, $219 million contract offer they could do
Max Action.
That doesn't hurt.
Howard, stick around. Coming up, did the NBA make a mistake not punishing Zaza Gabor Pachulia? That's next on First Things First.
All right, now I'm going to be angry again.
I know, right?
It's too early in the morning to be